Do life's greatest questions seem like a mystery? Well, we're probably going to talk about it here at Appalachian Liturgy. Important questions like, are you a Jedi or an Imperial? Is oatmeal actually a breakfast cereal? Is a Catholic weekday really called a ferial? Did you know that Mr. Rogers was Presbyterial? So join us as we have a little fun talking about thy kingdom come. Appalachian Liturgy.
Okay, welcome everyone to the Appalachian Liturgy podcast. I am Justin Stacy.
I'm Reverend Brooke Atchley.
And I'm Justin Boland.
And tonight we are going to talk about something that has been relevant in the news for, I guess, the past month or so. Well, longer, obviously, but cancel culture. Let's figure out where we want to start. I think back in, what was it, February, that Gina Carano got quote unquote canceled from Disney, and I think that started us down the rabbit hole of everyone wanting to talk about cancel culture, and then now it's like everything's getting pinned as being canceled. So I
feel like that was just kind of like the first one we got post the election fiasco stuff. I think it's been going on a lot longer than a couple months, but that's just kind of like, oh yeah, let's go talk about other things besides elections directly.
So I wonder how, like if Biden hadn't won, if we were still in a Republican administration, how relevant these things are. Like, is this tied specifically to politics? Because, for example, the ones that would be like the news stations that are heavily promoting cancel culture is, of course, like Fox News and those type of news. Like, would they be talking about something else, something that positive Trump was doing, and not worrying about Gina Carano? Like, is that fair to say?
I don't think so. I mean, I think we've had this kind of cancel culture, if you will, for, I feel like, decades. I mean, I can remember the whole big boycott Disney because in the movie Aladdin, there were hidden subliminal messages. And I mean, and that was I think we've changed from boycott to cancel. I mean, we've changed that. I mean, I know there's a little bit of a difference, but
and I think a lot of it's kind of evolved out of a lot of what we used to call PC culture type thing too, to where like, and that's been many years. I mean, when was PC Principal on South Park? That's been quite a few seasons.
That was quite a few seasons ago, which he's still on there, and it's hilarious, by the way.
So don't you think, though, there's a difference between holding somebody accountable for their actions and what they say? I mean, there's natural consequences to things that we say and we do. I mean, we have the freedom to say whatever we want, but we don't have freedom from those consequences, right? So I think there's a difference between that and what somebody says now than digging up something that somebody said when they were 18 or 17 and causing them to lose their job over something that they said 10 years ago when they were a kid.
You sent me an article a few weeks back. I think it was Megyn Kelly from, I don't know, years ago or something. But who was it? Do you recall who that was? That, like, it was 10 years. She was 18 or something when she said something. And
there's been two that I've noticed in the news lately. One was an editor for, what was it, Teen Vogue or something?
Yeah, Alexi something. McDiamond. Yeah.
That she had said years ago. And then the other one was a young lady who had tried out and made the cheerleading squad at the University of Tennessee. Mm-hmm. And a high school acquaintance had saved a video of her from like her 8th grade or freshman year, when you're 13. And after she'd gotten this scholarship, blasted it out on social media. And the university had such an outcry that they canceled her admission and her scholarship to the school. To me, that's kind of, way over the line. And I think, especially as Christians, right? we are called to grow. I mean, in the Wesleyan tradition, we talk about moving on to perfection, right? That God never leaves us as we are. He's constantly improving us and making us more Christ-like. Sanctification is the other word for that. And if we don't give people space to grow and change, then pretty much what we're saying is you're all doomed. Whatever your worst sin is, right? That's what you're going to always be known as.
Yeah.
I think to talk about this too, we kind of have to step back and ask, what is cancel culture? Like, how would you define what it is? Like, and is it different than just holding somebody accountable? Is there a difference? Is it the same thing? Like, what are we even talking about here?
Good question, Bowling.
Yeah. I've been reflecting on this and trying to define what I would think cancel culture is. And one example, I think, of a culture adopting, I guess, a set of ethics that is deemed, if you have these, you're irredeemable, or you should be shunned in some form. And that's on racism. I feel like for the most part, we have, as a culture, the majority of us anyway, has said, if you come out with saying racist things publicly, you're going to get, stoned, right? But we see that as a good thing, right? But that's teaching a lesson. But is that the Christian way? Like, should we, is that allowing for forgiveness and grace?
So are you saying that you would define cancel culture kind of as just literally anytime you hold somebody accountable? Or is there a difference between holding somebody accountable and what gets called or what should be called cancel culture?
I would not call holding someone accountable. So for example, Gina Carano, I do not view her situation as cancel culture. I just don't. I see it as she had opportunities to stop doing what she was doing. She was employed. And I'm sure that she was warned many times to not use social media on, with those type of views. Now, the issue, and I know you and I have talked about this many times, the issue is it's because she has a set of political views that are conservative. And I would say, and she has a set of views that are more conspiracy leaning. And I think that's the more dangerous part. That they are canceling her freedom to use social media because she has some extreme views. Whereas the other actor that's in The Mandalorian, what's his name? I forget.
Pedro Pascal.
Yep. He does the same sort of thing on the opposite end, with more liberal views. And they don't have any problem with that at all. So there is a hypocrisy and double standard there, clearly. But I don't necessarily think I disagree with it, because I think if I had a company, I would do the same thing. So I don't view that as cancel culture. I view that as holding my employee accountable.
So cancel culture is only something when we disagree with holding somebody accountable.
I guess. So Brooke, the example that Brooke gave of digging something up, and who was the producer that was it James Gunn? So with Guardians of the Galaxy, right? And so he was supposed to direct the second one, and then they fired him over something that was like a tweet from 10 years ago or something, and then there was a big push from the fans to bring him back, and then they did. So those type of examples where you're digging up stuff from, ancient times and holding people accountable for that, I don't agree with that. Like, I think that would be examples of cancel culture. It's too far, in my opinion.
I tried to look up a few people's definition to kind of get where things were going. And there seemed to be kind of three real categories of what people were defining as cancel culture. The most the hardest to kind of argue was the almost like Supreme Court, oh, I know it when I see it type of thing. Like, there's not really a definition, but when I see this and I don't like it, it's cancel culture. So, and that's just kind of how you define it. It's an ad hoc definition. And I don't think that one's a very helpful way but I do think that's probably the most common way people look at it now.
Yeah.
another one I saw that gave a couple different criteria. And it said you kind of had to meet all three to be it. But one of the important parts that I thought was really interesting about it is one criteria it had was you had to kind of be canceling somebody for a like commonly held view, either at the time that they said something, if it's in the past, or a commonly held view today. So if you're canceling somebody for maybe their, to give a common example, like their views on LGBT issues, if they have a view that's kind of in line with the great part of the country, that would maybe fall into cancel culture, while canceling somebody for joining the KKK, which is a very, small thing, would not fall into cancel culture. And then I saw another one that people kind of gave a list of a bunch of signs of cancel culture. And then you pick, if you meet 2 or 3 of these, then it's probably cancel culture, but we're not going to say for sure. So there's kind of like it could be any of these things, or it can be whatever I want it to be. But right. I really liked the idea, and that's the one that kind of resonates the most with me, is that if you're canceling somebody for a commonly held viewpoint, either at the time they said it or at the time, right now. And I think that's where it really becomes problematic in a multicultural society that we happen to live in.
So I think for me, the most problematic of the 3 definitions that personally I find the most problematic is when we go back decades ago and we want to cancel artists or authors. I understand the need to say they were wrong in this held belief. But how much more powerful is it to say they were wrong? And this is where we've moved from, rather than just say, we're not going to talk about this person anymore. We're going to whitewash that, if you will. We're going to get rid of his or her books or whatever. The whole Dr. Seuss thing got blown way out of proportion, right? I mean, if you weren't paying attention and you were just looking at social media, you would have thought that Dr. Seuss was going to be pulled out of every library, that you needed to burn every book that you had. And it really wasn't. They had found a couple books that they didn't even, nobody really knew existed. And they said, we feel like this is over the line and we're going to quit publishing that.
Yep.
I think that's the best way to go about it.
I agree. And which brings me back to my point in that it got blown out of proportion because certain media outlets and social media and, certain people pick up on that type of stuff, especially when you're in the political environment that you don't agree with. Then you start picking up on it. It's why, I think during the Obama administration, there was this war on Christmas, and there was war on everything. That was a big tagline, war on whatever that the Obama administration was doing. It's just, people are looking for ways to demonize, and this in cancel culture and PC culture is a way to demonize the liberals or the left.
I think it goes both ways, though.
Yeah, I do too. I would definitely disagree with that. Like a lot of the most common ones that I saw, or that I kind of think of when you think of cancel culture, were things that didn't necessarily happen when you're pushing back against like a current administration that you might be saying Fox News might do. So you think of something like the James Damore, the guy at Google who wrote the internal memo that wound up getting fired then, the Barry Weiss thing at the New York Times, the same thing with one other writer at the New York Times that got fired here in the past year, McNeil, I think was his name, that got fired for when he was quoting and said a racist word during his quote.
Yeah, I remember that.
The J.K. Rowling stuff about her shouldn't be allowed to have platforms like on HBO with some of the new shows coming out. Let's see, like Brandon Ike, the guy at Mozilla, who founded Mozilla and Firefox. I think that was either under, that may have been under Obama actually before Trump. But either way, like there's a lot that happened prior to this current administration that I think are better examples of cancel culture than what's come out. And I think the reason why those do keep getting so much traction is because they are easy for both sides to kind of like see as an example of why cancel culture is either good or bad. Like, okay, look, they're just blowing out the Dr. Seuss out of proportion. Let's talk about how dumb people are to keep bringing up Dr. Seuss, while somebody will be like, they're even canceling Dr. Seuss. Like, look how bad cancel culture is. It's just, both people can feed on the ridiculousness of how it gets framed. And I definitely think people see it as more of like they see it as a hammer, and then you can see cancel culture anywhere if you think it's a problem. So like anytime you see somebody within your political ideology getting canceled or held accountable, no matter what it is. If you believe cancel culture is a big problem, you're probably going to trend to want to see it as cancel culture.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I have wondered, like, should we even label anything as cancel culture? Like, is it just accountability, and then we're just, based on if we agree on it, which is one of the definitions you said, if you agree with it or not, that's when you label it either cancel culture or not. Like, is anything really cancel culture? So Gina Carano, for example, going back to her, after she was fired from Disney, she got picked up to do a movie with Ben Shapiro. Like, she's not canceled. She's still going to be making money. There's a platform.
So I think doing a movie with Ben Shapiro at the Daily Wire is not exactly the same level of notoriety as doing it with the biggest media company in the world.
But she's going to. True, but she's going to make money. It's not like that. It's not like Roseanne ended her career.
Sure.
So.
But not everything is cancel culture, but that doesn't mean cancel culture doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we start out talking about holding people accountable for what they say. So, like, I work for an organization, a religious organization, and one of the things that I agreed to when I was hired by that organization was that I would not bring negative press to that organization.
Right.
And, I mean, we go through all of these classes and continuing ed on social media and what's allowed to be said and what's not. And, I mean, they would like for us to be apolitical, honestly, which as a clergy person, I try really hard to do because of the sway that I have over people, but folks want to say that that's overstepping their bounds and they're stepping on my First Amendment rights and whatever. But I had a choice to work for that company or not work for that company.
Yep.
Right. That's my choice. And going into it, I knew up front. It's not like I worked for them for 20 years and they said, okay, now, but even if they did, they would have that right to say, as a face of our company or our organization, as someone who goes out and on our behalf teaches people about what we're doing, we can't have you saying these things.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that?
I don't see anything wrong with that. And I think it's important that most white collar jobs, most companies, corporations, they do the same thing. You're going through training to know what ethics you can have while being representative of their company. And it molds people, it molds societies, and I think a lot of, people that are in power in our culture in terms of corporate America, they either have those beliefs or they at least know that they need to have those beliefs. So they're going to, pretend to have them or whatever. And, I think that when you are at the top and you have that power, and maybe this is where some people will see it as cancel culture, because you do have a lot of, I think, liberal-minded people that are leading Disney and leading, other companies that are going to enforce their vision of what is the right ethics. And that is going to align with their political beliefs. And what can you do about that? So boycotting, you brought up the difference between boycotting and cancel culture. I think this might be it. Boycotting to me is more grassroots. It is more average Joe people just saying, we're not going to buy anything from that company because they offended us in some way. But that rarely ever works, because people do not boycott. Even if they do for a month or so, they're going to give in eventually, because they're going to want.
I boycotted Hardee's and wrote them like every week. Do you remember the Hardee's commercial with the women that were like in these super bikinis and they were seductively eating the hamburgers on?
Yeah, they used to have it all the time. Yeah.
Yes. So I wrote my whole family, and they're going to laugh if they hear this. I forbid anybody from eating anything from Hardee's until they pulled those commercials. And I wrote them and we went years. And I did find out that my family would sometimes sneak and go and get something from Hardee's and then make sure that all the trash was not in the house. So I do think some people follow through, but I don't know that it really ever hurts the bottom line of a company,
doesn't.
because when one political faction or one ethical or moral faction
It
says,
stimulates the
"Let's
other
do
side.
a deal, we're going to boycott it," then then the other like throws their support behind it. I mean, you think about Chick-fil-A. Like, I really feel like there was a effort to cancel Chick-fil-A.
At
Not
one point,
just-
I think there was.
Not just
Yeah.
boycott them, but cancel them, right? And the conservative movement said, heck
Kept it
no,
alive. Yeah.
and they like poured into Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happens every single time. I've never been one to try and boycott things. Like, a company can do something that I don't like, and if I like their product, I'm still going to buy it. I guess I'm just a consumer, and I'm going to do that. My ethics doesn't really follow the products I buy, so I'm just going to do that. And I think most Americans are like that.
Shocks me about you.
Really?
Yeah, because you're so like fervent on your beliefs and stuff. I would think that
Not when
you
it comes to
follow that.
boycotting. I'm just not a big fan of boycotting. I've never tried to do it. I'm trying to think of something that I would be passionate about to boycott, like a company, and I can't even think of one.
So is there a product though that you would like boycott because you just...
Okay, so let's bring up Lil Nas X. That happened this week with his Satan Nike shoes. If Nike had actually done that, like if they had put their support behind satanic symbols and for whatever statement, as a Christian, I might be more aligned to say, okay, that might be a line for me. But I don't even know if that would be. Like, if I really found a pair of Nike shoes, I might still do it. Like, that might be my weakness is if I need a product, I'm going to end up buying it. And,
So this isn't a perfectly well thought out philosophy, but it's kind of in general what I usually follow. The problem I have with that is like Nike is obviously always also does other immoral activities in their business. Like there was to give an example from this week as well, there were calls to boycott Delta and Coca-Cola due to them being in the state of Georgia because of some of the Georgia election laws that were passed this past week. But those same two companies have also actually outright lobbied for or against a bill that was going to ban some things from China that came from the Uyghur section of China where they're literally holding concentration camps and stuff. And so there wasn't cause to boycott for something like that. And the problem, I think, when you start trying to boycott because of one specific thing is that there's other things that you didn't boycott from. You have to have a degree of separation from what they're doing.
You have to ignore the other things.
And if there's a company that's outright like making their moral stance and this is what they're going to try to follow, I would rather try to reward that company rather than try to boycott a specific company because of something immoral, because they'll probably do something immoral somewhere else. And you just can't live life knowing everything that a company is going to do or has done in the past.
Yeah.
Going back to the Nike thing, do you not feel like this week there was this bit of let's cancel Nike?
Oh, that was the immediate reaction. There was a push.
I mean, people were like taking Nike out of their closets that they had already purchased.
And to be clear, in case Justin wasn't clear enough, Nike had nothing to do with it. They're actually suing them over the fact that they put the Nike symbol on the shoe.
Yeah, but let's also be clear that people, wanted to boycott Nike because of Colin Kaepernick, right? So.
I actually think this is a good transition because you mentioned something kind of about this too, like talking about different political persuasions and stuff like that. And I do think that's kind of why you hear it and why it's kind of more dangerous in a certain direction. In that, like the people on the right who you might hear argue more against cancel culture and how bad it is, they don't have an issue canceling people too. For certain reasons, Colin Kaepernick kind of being one of the examples about it. And then there's a local example about it that's kind of in the news right now. It's still up in the air. I don't know all the details, but there's even articles on ESPN about ETSU's coach leaving because he supported people kneeling for the anthem on the basketball team. And that's some examples that you can find on the right. But I think the bigger problem and why you see it more so focused on the left is there's a lot more concentration of cultural power on the left in terms of like tech companies, tech institutions like Twitter, Facebook, Google, those all seem to have management that lean to the left.
Yep.
You can think about the media, the Hollywood media is almost, 90%. I don't know, I pulled that number out of thin air, but like towards the left. And then even like your academic institutions seem to lean more towards the left as well. So I think that's where it kind of becomes a cultural monopoly, and why the culture in the word cancel culture is more of a thing, even if it is a grassroots effort to kind of, or semi-grassroots, because you kind of get organization on social media. But even if it is that, it's still a problem if we are creating bubbled sections of our society to where like you can only live within this, and it's not truly a diversified, society.
Right.
So, I had thought about the ETSU thing too. I think it's very, I've watched that living in proximity to the university. I started really paying attention, especially on social media, about how people were reacting. And, it's sad for me to watch all these players leaving because of what that means for them, what that means for the university. But to hear them talk about, thanking their coach for standing up for them.
Mm-hmm.
There are very few times that I would say I'm ashamed of where I'm from. Like, I'm very proud to be from East Tennessee and have lived in Southwest Virginia for so long and back in East Tennessee now. But I'm hurt for the way all of that was handled. I think on both sides. And I think that's the danger of cancel culture for me. So, if you are trying to work out how you feel about a hot button issue, right? We're all raised thinking certain things because our family of origin thinks those things, the people we're around. We need to give people space to try to have a dialogue and have conversation. And my fear with cancel culture is that we're actually stifling that. Mm-hmm. So you can't come out and say, I don't understand. Like, I can't come out and say, this makes me angry that you're doing this, but tell me more. I mean, you're just completely shut down. And as Christians, that's like the opposite of what we should be doing. We should be encouraging conversation, holy conferencing. And when somebody says something that's inappropriate, we don't shut them down and turn that underground and let that fester. We want to bring it to the light, right? And talk about it. But my fear, and a couple of weeks ago, there was a professor, and I don't remember now where it was from. Somebody knows better more than me. But the Zoom was recording the class, and two professors were talking afterwards, and they had talked about racism in the class. And one of the instructors talked about how she admitted that she struggled sometimes with her Black students because of her own prejudices. And she was saying it in a way that she was kind of confessing that, right? She was fired.
Wow.
Yep. I remember reading about that too. And I think go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, I think we have to be able to have a safe space to say that. Now, you could say, well, she shouldn't have done it when it was, being filmed or whatever. But if we make all of that secret or bad, people aren't going to deal with those issues. They're not going to be honest with the way they feel. So there's dangers in that. I mean, I think back, bringing it back to the church, it's when we're struggling with sin and we try to hide it.
Yes.
And it makes it worse. Like, instead of being the church and helping people with that and supporting folks and making good choices or whatever, we push it and hide it, and it just gets worse.
That's exactly what I was going to say too, is this, in that type of behavior, encourages people to hide your mistakes way down deep, let it not come out in the public, and it just stifles conversation entirely. Like when you think of improvements in relations between races, one of my favorite stories is a story of a guy named Daryl Davis, and he's a guy that is a Black man who would meet with KKK members, and he collects their robes after he's met with them and dialogue with them and actually change their minds about some of their previous viewpoints. And there's lots of studies that go in and say that, when you approach somebody confrontationally, it's not that effective. So like we might get it out of the public view, but we're not actually changing people's minds by saying that you can't be this. And you think about something like a treatment of like the LGBT community. How we, even if you talk about not talk about like people's views on gay marriage or something like that, but just how people are treated. What seems more convincing to people? The fact that you cancel somebody who treated them wrong, or people who know somebody personally who's LGBT and them being in their life has made their minds different on how you're supposed to be treated. It's these personal relations with people. And that's like the whole Christian viewpoint is like a personal relationship with Christ changes us. A personal relationship with other people who you might think have the wrong viewpoint is what's going to change them.
Yeah. So one thing that I was thinking about, and you actually brought this up before, Bowling, is that we seem to have a shift in our culture, and maybe it's just because we're kind of in a post-Christian culture now. But we have this idea that we start as perfect, and once we have that fault, whatever that irredeemable sin is that we need to cancel, there is no redemption from it. Whereas the Christian view should be, we are all fallen. Yep. We all can do those irredeemable sins. And we should have such forgiveness and grace for one another to give room to allow people to grow.
So I think of an issue that I think crops up, and I don't know that it matters what denomination, what flavor of Christianity you follow, and that's abortion. Mm-hmm. And I think the way that we talk about abortion and the women who have had abortions cancel those women out in our Christian circles, and I've had this argument with lots of folks, so as the church, we've got to be careful about casting stones about cancel culture because we do it, and I've met with lots of women who have said, because churches do X, Y, and Z, I don't feel that God loves me, and that's really canceling that person. And so I think it's about the way we talk about stuff too. Yeah.
To take it back to Lil Nas X, not that I want this whole podcast.
Apparently, we should follow this.
It is
the Old Town Road podcast.
Old Town Road podcast. But he said, the real reason, I don't think he's a Satanist, but the reason that he wanted to do that was to kind of stick it to the church. Like he was trying to get back to the church because of the way he felt he was treated growing up, being a gay kid, being a gay person. And that goes back to, he obviously grew up in a denomination or of Christianity that canceled the idea of being gay. So he thought he wasn't loved. He thought he wasn't welcome. And now he's turning to Satan literally to stick it to the church. And that's what can happen if we go into cancel culture as the church.
But don't you think, I'm going to play devil's advocate here a little bit, because as the church, we have an obligation to talk about sin, to talk about evil. And that's not just in these huge systemic things. There's personal sin, there's personal evil. And I think we have to talk about that. And so there's a fine line, and I don't know if it's people's personal guilt. I don't know if it's the way we go about it, but people feel canceled if you happen to talk about whatever personal sin it is that they're, struggling with. And I say this from a clergy point of view, because I don't care if you're talking about sin, somebody's going to be angry with you after Sunday morning.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to what Justin was saying too, the idea that we don't want to be told that we do stuff wrong. We have this idea that we're basically all right. And so if somebody tells us we do something wrong, they hate me, they're canceling me, and all of that.
We're being persecuted.
And I do think a lot of it stems from that idea that we've kind of switched from the extreme total depravity view to the totally okay view, no depravity view as a culture as a whole. And so like if somebody disagrees with that, they're attacking you wholesale as a person.
Yeah. So I guess I'm finding it ironic that right now we have churches screaming about cancel culture when in a lot of ways the church is the original cancel culture start people. I mean, that was real eloquent there.
Go back to the Puritans.
Yeah.
I wouldn't so much say that the church was the originator of it, but the church certainly indulged in that part of human nature. I think it's more so a part of human nature is that we want to exclude those that are either not like us or against us. Part of the fallen part of human nature. Yeah.
It's tribalism.
The church should be above it because we should have that supernatural grace that we've experienced.
And we do sometimes. I don't want people to think that I'm anti the church. I mean, I've devoted my life working for the church to introduce people to Jesus Christ. But at the same time, sometimes we get it wrong. And man, when we get it wrong, we get it wrong.
Yeah, and I think it's more like hypocrisy from the church because we have so much reason to be better than that when we aren't. It's even worse.
And do you think it's a power thing? I mean, we've talked a lot about pendulums. Is it this kind of, we have the power now, so we're going to push our moral agenda and we're going to force it so that we push society back to the direction we want. And then when, political power or whatever changes, it happens again. And I really do, we talked about during the Obama administration, and even I can remember in the Clinton administration, I know I'm older than y'all, this kind of war on stuff. We have created a cultural and a moral war because of it.
Yeah. I think it's a lot of what gets called like the Flight 93 election. Like, this is the election to save our lives. We have to do whatever we can to make things right. And that's a view that really is shared, unfortunately, by whatever your political persuasion might be, that, if we have power, we have to hang on to it and do what we have to do to keep it.
It's the most important election of our lives.
It's always the most important election of our lives. Yes.
And unfortunately,
which is not a Christian way.
I think, unfortunately, at least in the evangelical realm, there is a big belief that we need to have control of the culture. And I'm trying to remember what they talked about this on the Holy Post not long ago. It was something kingdom. Remember I told you it's something about the kingdom.
It's like dominion theology you're talking about?
Something like that. So basically there's like all of these elements that you need to control to be able to bring about God's kingdom on the world. And culture, of course, is one of them. Politics is, of course, one of them. And, there's apparently a pretty big belief in this in the evangelical realm. And, if you think that everything's, a spiritual war between our political ideology, which we think is the God-ordained one, and the other, then it's just always
God ordained,
right? Or ordained by something, there's always going to be a war. There will be no end until we give up that idea that we are on the right side and we are bringing about God's kingdom. God's kingdom is coming about regardless.
There's a saying from G.K. Chesterton that like the worst sins are virtues held in isolation from other virtues. And so like the idea of like seeing the good in the church and what we want to see, that's a virtue. But we also have to realize the humanity of other people too. And if we're not helping them out, we're very much misusing our calling.
So maybe we need to pay attention to how we are treating cancel culture, right? Like maybe if we find ourselves treating people as objects because they disagree with us, maybe we need to be aware that we're canceling that person, and I think it's also important for us to realize that most people, when they are, quote, canceling somebody or pushing a moral or ethical issue, they really are doing it from a place where they really think it's what's best for everybody.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we can disagree what's good, and I think a lot of times my kids would say to me, "You're not listening to me. You're not hearing me." No, I hear you. I disagree with you, right? Like I hear everything you say. I just don't agree.
Right.
And we need to be able to say that without vilifying someone.
We can't see that other people we disagree with may some way that we can't even imagine be operating in good faith. Everybody we disagree with is acting in bad faith and is just saying something to discredit us.
So here's something to spin it back into the church. Is there a way for the church to be able to deal with people, someone individually or a people group that has specific issues? They have views that are just not attainable to the church or whatever. Because in 1 Corinthians, Paul talks about turning someone over to Satan for the destruction, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord. So, is there a way for the church to even do that now? Given that if you get excommunicated from this church, well, I can just go down the street and find a church that may align with what I'm saying anyway, so I don't have to really change. Are we just in a broken system of church that we can't really mold people the right way because they can find another church?
So I do think that churches poach people. I think the church has gotten away from trying to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ to just keeping their doors open. And so what we do is we steal people, if you will, from other denominations and other congregations, instead of being open to people who may not, the true meaning of evangelicalism, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of drawing people to Christ, we're drawing people to the church. Yep. And that's a big difference in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what's important too is when Paul's talking about that, he's talking about people who are already Christians too. He's not necessarily talking about, evangelizing those outside the church.
Correct.
And I do think that even historically, when things like excommunication may have been used a lot more widely, the main method of evangelizing people has always been forming a personal relationship with them,
right?
And meeting them where they are at. That's how God met. That's how God's met his chosen people all throughout scriptural salvation history.
Yeah.
So I'm probably gonna get myself into trouble with this, but
do it.
Among clergy, we may talk about growth by attrition. So when that particularly really hard person who is constantly just fighting every single little thing, they're complaining about every change, the toilet paper brand got changed, so there's a big war on it or whatever. When those people finally decide to leave the congregation and go somewhere else, there's a collective sigh of relief, and it's not, you're never happy. Well, I won't say you're never happy to see somebody go. There's always sadness when somebody goes, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of times there's a big sigh of relief, and there's growth that happens because that person who's sowing those seeds of discord, mm-hmm. and you're spending all your energy putting fires out, has gone. And now people like each other again. And I wonder if that's kind of what Paul is talking about here, is there are those people who are just so unhappy with themselves, who have missed the mark when it comes to following Jesus, that they make it miserable for everybody else.
Right.
This isn't the prophetic voice calling us back. It's just the loudest voice gonging without love.
Right. And, I think not only would that help the church that Paul's talking about, it would also help the person, because turning them over to Satan is a way, like if they're going to go down this sinful, destructive path, eventually they're going to get so low, they may have to turn from that and go back to God.
And so we may not be doing them a favor by placating them.
Yeah.
I mean, we're actually doing worse. So I do think it's important to realize, especially with Paul's writings, that Paul usually 99% of the time is talking to people that consider themselves followers of Christ.
Yes.
Yep.
He's not talking to the people who call themselves followers of Christ about people who don't call themselves
mm-hmm.
followers of Christ.
Yep.
He's talking to the people within the walls of the church and saying, you've lost your way, you imbeciles. Like,
yeah.
How quickly have you forgotten? How quickly have you forgotten that you were mired in sin? How quickly have you forgotten how ugly you were?
Right.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure Paul wouldn't be the top that would harp on just canceling everybody, considering his history.
Yeah, I use Paul a lot to defend against cancel culture, even though I felt like I defended it more in this than I intended to. But if you're going, if you look at Paul's history, and from a Christian standpoint, if you are going to just cancel somebody out, he never should have stepped in the church.
Right.
Yeah. But God used him, and God always uses fallen people and people that we would cancel as human beings for his glory and to bring about his kingdom. That's just the way he works.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think as the church, we've got to be careful about this cancel culture.
I think we should be the light and the hope and show the practical benefits of what can come out of using that grace, to not cancel somebody, and the power of redemption.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
But that doesn't mean we're pushovers.
Shouldn't.
That's right. You better watch out. I will cancel you.
There we go.
I will kick you from this Zoom call.
Excommunicated from the Zoom call.
That's right. Oh, that's good stuff. Amen. That was a really good conversation. All right. So I guess that will conclude us. So thanks everyone for joining. Peace be with you and have a good night. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope you got some enjoyment out of the podcast this week. Remember to check out our website, www.appalachianliturgy.com, and follow us on all of our social medias. Merch and Patreon is coming soon, so continue to check back for that as well. If you want an easy way to support us, though, make sure to subscribe to our channels and like our videos on YouTube. Also, join our email list for updates and let us know how we're doing. See you next week, everyone. Appalachian Liturgy Podcast